Hi students, as I mentioned Wednesday morning, my mother is having some significant health problems and I do need to be in Illinois next week. So I'm going to record 2 lecture videos, part 1 and part 2, for week 2 of 5460 Nursing Management Healthcare Leadership Part 2. I will be asking that you watch both of these videos and that you go out to discussion board and answer some questions that I'll pose on discussion board. In addition to answering the questions that I'll pose on discussion board, I'm going to ask that you also respond to each of your classmates' responses, or comment on each of your classmates' responses. In that way we're able to simulate a little bit the normal classroom. So I hope you have the slides for week 2 in front of you. I have numbered those slides and I'll be going through these slides and referencing the slides by number. And there will be part 1 and part 2 because I don't want to run out of video time, and so I'll stop it somewhere around, I don't know, 20 minutes, 22 minutes in, and then I'll pick up and do a second video. So on slide 2, well, first of all, what we're going to talk about this afternoon or today is strengths, leadership, and strategies. And I may leave most of strategy for next week when I'll kind of cover the totality of it. Let's see how the time goes. On slide 2, I don't often quote the Bible, but I think this is a really good quote from Scripture when we begin to think about strengths. Yet each person has a special gift from God of one kind or another. It's important for us to know that we are made with strengths and that that's been purposeful. And you also see on slide 3 one of Mr. Larson's little cartoons from Far Side. A duck is trying to teach other ducks how to quack. And actually they are diagramming how to a duck sentence. So that's a little bit about what we're doing as we move into this whole arena of strengths. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, then you know it's a duck. And so the same way with all of our strengths. And strengths are many. If you've been able to go out and on the in the Gallup website, and I'm sorry I'm not going to hear about your strengths, but I'll read about them because that's going to be some of the questions that I'll pose on the discussion board. So slide number 4 just gives you some questions. I'm going to kind of pick and choose amongst those questions, but that's what I would like you to comment on and respond to these questions on the discussion board. So actually our author, Nordhaus, does talk about strengths, and he talks about strengths from Gallup's perspective. And because Gallup is part of Nebraska, and it got started really, Gallup as we know it today got started originally, it was called Selection Research Incorporated, built by a man by the name of Dr. Don Clifton. Started here in Lincoln, and then they continued to grow and branch out and eventually bought the Gallup Company, which started in Princeton, New Jersey. But it's a privately owned company, family owned. Don Clifton's 4 children now own the company itself. Don and Shirley Clifton have both passed away. But anyway, he is really considered maybe the father of psychology, as his PhD in psychology from UNL. But let's look at slide 5. And here's how some folks at Gallup describe a strength. So a strength is an attribute or quality of an individual that accounts for successful performance. Actually, I think these kinds of definitions came out of Nordhaus. So a strength is an attribute or quality of an individual that accounts for successful performance. So just take a moment, think about your own life, your own career. You have very significant strengths, and they show up in the workplace, they show up in our families, they show up in our volunteer activities. And then there's the ability, another part of the definition of a strength is the ability to consistently demonstrate exceptional work. There are certain things that you just consistently do and do very well, and it's part of your strength. And we now can put names to those, and we can measure them actually a little bit. Measurement in a qualitative perspective, not a quantitative. And then a third part of the definition is it's a pre-existing capacity that is authentic and energizing, and it enables peak performance. And that's what gets to be really exciting about understanding your strengths, because once you understand your strengths, you can begin to rely on those. You know them. You can begin to see them play out. And, you know, at the same time, you can, if you learn the strengths of the people you work with, if you know the strengths of the person you report to, or the strengths of the people that are working side by side, all of a sudden you can begin to recognize strength in another person that maybe isn't one of your strengths, but you know that they're always going to lead with that particular strength. And that can make a huge difference in terms of teamwork and how we get along in our work environments. Well, moving on to slide 6 then, Gallup gives us a strength equation. So, you know, I noticed there's a typo here on this slide, but at any rate, so we talk about talent times investment equals a strength. So back to that, there's a pre-existing capacity in you for certain kinds of things, always doing certain kind of things. But you still must spend some time practicing, developing your skills, and building a knowledge base around that strength. So this is like nature and nurture. You know, both are necessary. When we watch a concert pianist, we know that this person has incredible talent. I think of Van Cliburn, that just, you know, a person who just could play beautiful music. I'm not sure the man is still alive, but I grew up listening to some of Van Cliburn's piano concertos. And but you also had to know that this person had to practice and practice and practice. He has to know music inside and out to be able to perform. So it becomes a strength when we combine talent and investment, when we put those two together. And then it becomes the ability to consistently provide near perfect performance. Now, Gallup has 34 strengths. Not all of us have all 34 in our top 5. That's a little bit of a joke. But in actuality, these 34 strengths play out. As I said, in our work life, you can see them in your family life. You can see them in, you know, your volunteer activities. Maybe you're involved in some community work where you live. Strengths are strengths, and they come to the forefront always. Now, what's interesting is that Gallup has divided these strengths into 4 domains of leadership. So you see those on slide 7: executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. And you'll see each, you know, under each one of those 4 domains, you can find your top 5 strengths. I hope each of you were able to go out and discover what your top 5 strengths were. And I'm anxious to hear about them myself. What makes, I'm going to hesitate to even say this, but I have heard it before from some people in Gallup that, you know, what makes for a balanced leader might be that you have at least one strength in all 4 of these areas. I can tell you right off the bat that I don't. I don't have a strength in executing. I do have a strength in influencing. Let's see which one. It's maximizer. I have a strength, so I'm going to give you my top 5. So I have maximizer. That's in influencing. That means I always want to sort to the best. I want to sort to the best in myself, and I want to sort to the best in others, and I call for the best in others. Relationship building. I have connectedness, and I have relator. And so those connectedness is one of the more spiritually oriented strengths. And then relator just means that, you know, I'm willing to spend some time and energy, and it comes natural for me to extend myself to create a good relationship. And I really do see that in some of my work relationships. Hopefully you all begin to feel that a little bit in student-teacher relationships, but I see that in my family relationships. And then finally, under strategic thinking, I have 2 strengths in that arena. It's futuristic and strategic. So when I think about myself and my own strengths, and this is what I want you to do, is to think about yourself and your own strengths and which one of the domains they might fall in. So I'm really good at planning, and obviously, the work I got to do at St. Elizabeth and CHI Nebraska really utilized those strengths of strategic and futuristic, and actually ideation is in my top 10, and some relationship building. But I'm not good at executing. I'm not the one to like roll up my sleeves. I like to work hard, but I'm not the one that you want to put in charge of executing. I can implement a project, but I'm not so good at executing it and keeping it going. And certainly around restorative, I can quickly lose interest, get bored. I'm just kind of sharing out of my own experience. So hopefully you are finding it interesting to learn about your strengths. So let's move on to slide 8. I put a slide in here called Relationship Builders. If I was with you today, I would play for you an actual audio tape that I've loaded onto my computer. It's my husband, my late husband, talking about relationship builders. And since so much of leadership is about relationship, I decided to share these with you. I'm not going to go into them in depth. I have him on my computer, if you will. At a future class, if we have some time, I'd be happy to share this with you. But just know that because leadership is part of relationship, he brings some thoughts and ideas to us, and actually I have a handout I can share with you as well. So let's move on to slide 9, where VIA, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on VIA. This is coming from our Nordhaus book. But there's 6 universal core virtues. So this is another way of looking at strengths. And as you kind of go around the circle, we have cognitive strengths, we have emotional strengths, we have interpersonal strengths, civic strengths, strengths over excess, and strengths about meaning. Again, I think you can readily find the overlap and the interaction between the 6 universal core virtues, if you will: wisdom and knowledge, courage, humanity, justice, temperance, and transcendence. You can find those overlaps. Gallup just uses some different words. If we move on to slide 10, then the Center for Applied Positive Psychology and Realize 2 assessment. Now these folks, Nordhaus talks with us about these. These folks basically claim that we have realized strengths and we have unrealized strengths. And now you'll notice here's kind of a confusion of term, because a realized strength is something that represents our strongest assets. We are energized when we use them, and thus we maximize them. Well, there's that term again, maximize, that Gallup uses to talk about excellence, if you will. An unrealized strength is a personal attribute that might be less visible, and those are strengths that you want to marshal. And your spouse or your partner, or a person on your work team who works very closely with you might say to you, "Oh, you know what? You are always doing blah, 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 blah." Well, they're talking about a strength, and if you don't recognize that strength in yourself, then one of the things you might do is to marshal that strength. So a strength that you know about, you will maximize. A strength that you don't know about, you can marshal. And then there's learned behaviors. We have ingrained things that we have learned throughout life and our experience, and they do not inspire and they don't excite people. So we all have these. We all have some characteristics, or some of us might worry about a personality defect of some sort. I don't personally think we have personality defects, but we do have learned behaviors that might get in the way in a work setting, and certainly can get in the way when we're leading other people. So what we can do with this is just work to moderate them. I think about mitigate them, or find somebody that you work with that might be a good complement in an area that you're not so strong in, but they are. So, but learned behaviors comes back to doing some things that are not necessarily productive on the work setting, not really helpful in a team. And then we do also have some weaknesses, and these are limiting attributes. They might drain our energy, or they result in a poor performance. And the suggestion from applied positive psychology is that we minimize our weaknesses as much as possible. You'll note, it doesn't say we get rid of our weaknesses, but we can work to minimize them. You know, I think about gossip and spreading rumors about people maybe being, I'm hoping, sure that none of you do that, but it happens in the work setting. You know, people will gossip about each other, or they'll spread some negativity about a coworker. That might be a weakness that one would certainly want to minimize. So, moving on to slide 11, in terms of strength-based leadership, here's just a little stepwise process that you might want to think about. First, you want to discover your own strengths. And then you want to develop your strengths. Remember, a few slides back we talked about talent times investment equals a strength. So you want to learn about it. You want to utilize it. You want to try it out. You want to practice with it. And then the next step is really to recognize and encourage the strengths of others. You know, if all of us operate every day from a strength-based context, wow, it's like the sky's the limit in terms of what we can get accomplished. And then a final step is to foster a positive strength-based environment. I'm pretty sure I pulled this from one of the books that Gallup has put out on strength. There's Strength-Based Management, First Break All the Rules. There's another book. You might, on the Gallup website, I'm sure you can find some of their books. But just you know, if you want a place to start, and continue throughout your career in leadership, discover your own strengths, develop those strengths, recognize and engage the strengths of others. I think I might have said earlier, encourage. I think recognize, encourage, and engage the strengths of others, and then foster a positive strength-based environment. Again, kind of back to that concept of, you know, maybe rather than finding fault with each other, we find out what's right about the other person and we recognize their strengths. And sometimes a person's strengths might be diametrically opposed to our particular strength. And I'll give you an example. One of the vice presidents that I worked with for quite a few years and learned to gain an appreciation for him. I'll say it that way. This person had deliberate. It was one of his top strengths. Well, people who have strength in deliberate, first of all, don't like making quick decisions, and they want to think through everything. They want to think it through, and they want to this particular person was very good at asking those hard questions. Well, initially when I worked with him, I'm strategic, I'm futuristic. I can kind of see the future, and I struggle to help other people see and get excited about what I see the future as being. And my cup is generally half full, not half empty. So right off the bat, there was a little conflict going on because he would challenge me and he would ask those hard questions. Once I found out that deliberate was one of his strengths, and I happen to know where all 34 strengths fall for me, and deliberate's very low on my list. And so I thought, wow, he has a strength in an area that I'm not very good at. And so maybe I want to use his strength. And he and I started having some conversations around that. And at the end of our career together, I heard him, another person found me and said, quoted this colleague of mine whom I had thought maybe I didn't have the best relationship with, and that he and I had really conflicted, how much he had appreciated me as a strategic planner. So I guess finding somebody's strength and recognizing it and working on it together works. I'm just sharing that with you because at one point it was pretty painful. I thought, oh my goodness, I'm just failing at creating a relationship with this person, and I'm constantly kind of at loggerheads with him, and I say one thing and he says another. I say it's white and he says it's black, and we would kind of go back and forth. And so until I discovered where he was really coming from, and I discovered that his strength was something that I really needed, and that more importantly, I didn't need that strength. The organization needed that strength, and that we could complement each other. So with that, let me real quickly go on to slide 12. and I'll try to get, I'll get up to slide 15. So a little more philosophy of leadership. We talked about that this week, but we have McGregor's Theory X. And the assumption here is that people need to be directed and controlled. You can read through that. Theory X is used less and less and less. It was maybe really important in the era of manufacturing or lots of, assembly line kind of work, but McGregor's Theory X and those Theory X leaders end up micromanaging people. Then we have McGregor's Theory Y, and this assumption is the average person doesn't inherently dislike work. Work is natural as play, but people will shoulder responsibility and self-control toward goals once they are committed. So Theory Y leaders support subordinates without the need for direct control. They help subordinates find their passion. We might say the Theory Y leaders help subordinates with their strengths, and they learn how to use their strengths. So the challenge is that we understand our philosophical underpinnings of our own leadership style. Do we wake up in the morning and think, oh dear, I'm managing this group of people today, or I'm a leader in a particular committee, and everybody there is just, has to be directed, and I need to be in charge? Or do we wake up going, wow, I get to work with people that have some significant strengths, and my job is to try to facilitate and bring those strengths together for the betterment of the organization, or to achieve a goal that a particular committee or team is asked to do. Well, moving on to slide 3, we also see sometimes in our world, we see these in leaders of countries and other places. We see authoritarian leadership. Now, I chose a picture of a coach that seems to be chewing out a poor football guy, but that's kind of what we find. And in the authoritarian leadership, they are in charge. They're the ones making the decisions, and they're telling everybody else what to do. And as you can read through this, sometimes the outcomes of this are that sometimes you can achieve efficiency and productiveness, but you may also increase turnover, and it may foster dependence rather than growth on the part of the people that you're leading. And then we get to democratic leadership. It's similar to Theory Y. Leaders want to work with subordinates. So this is much more of the relationship building, the influencing. Outcomes are that you end up with a stronger worker who is motivated to be productive. And then a third kind of leadership, we have authoritarian, democratic, and finally laissez-faire. And laissez-faire leadership actually, I think, is one of the worst because it leaves people without anything to depend on. And what I've discovered over time is that subordinates sometimes end up in real conflict with each other, and it can create a pretty unhealthy work environment. So we're up to slide 16. There's a suggestion about listening to a TED Talk called by Brene Brown. I find Brene Brown vastly interesting, and her concepts on vulnerability are good for all of us. I'm going to stop this video, and we'll call this one part 1, and I'll pick up in a minute and start part 2.